2 weeks after the Supreme Court struck down Roe versus Wade. The president said this.
What we're witnessing wasn't a constitutional judgment. It was an exercise in raw political power. We need 2 additional pro-choice senators and a pro-choice House to codify Roe as federal law. Your vote can make that a reality. I know it's frustrating, and it made a lot of people very angry, but the truth is this, and it's not just me saying it, it's what the court said. When you read the decision, the court has made clear it will not protect the rights of women.
The president said this court has made it clear, quote, it will not protect the rights of women. The answer, Biden said, is for us to vote. But in the meantime, his executive order aims to expand access to abortion pills, protect access to contraception, and ensure adequate emergency medical care for patients. This comes at a time when the need could not be more urgent, with abortion now banned in at least 8 states and with bans pending in at least 10 more. The latest in Mississippi, where the state's only abortion clinic shut its doors on Thursday. Biden's executive order also comes after mounting criticism from some Democrats over the administration's tepid response to the Supreme Court ruling. And it raises the questions of whether the president will also heed the calls of progressive members of Congress to use executive orders for bold action on other issues like student debt, immigration, and climate change. Here to break it all down with us is Dr. Katie McHugh, an OBGYN and reproductive rights advocate, and Rick Tyler, and a good friend on MSNBC political analyst. Doctor, let me start with you. What do you make of this executive order? And is it enough?
The executive order is a great start. I do wish it had more urgency. The patients that we see and the people that we care for, they need action now. They need protection now. So while I'm so glad for some protection around the issues of medication abortion access and protection around travel out of state, I do wish we could see more broad protections and more urgency in this matter.
So, Rick, one of the things that I found striking is that he's using this as an opportunity to use his pen for executive action to communicate at minimum where he stands on abortion care. Can we expect him to do something similar to what Trump did? I mean, Trump used the power of the pen to communicate to his supporters what his priorities were, even if he knew that they were going to be thrown out in court. He would make it the court's problem. Can we see the president doing this now, not just on abortion care, but on immigration, perhaps, or even on gun reform and climate change?
Sure, he could, and he is doing it on the Roe decision. But like Trump, it outlines an inherent weakness that the many things under presidents are often out of their control. Court decisions are often out of their control. He's trying to bring things into their control, but he's mostly trying to convey to his supporters and his critics, largely on the left. The right is always going to be a critic. That he is doing something, because many people are upset about the way that Biden is governing. And I suspect if we had a parliamentary system, you'd see Joe Biden right where Boris Johnson was yesterday. I think he would be ousted by his own party.
So if you were advising the president, will you tell him to use the power of the pen more often, Rick?
I think what the president has to do is learn that he's got to get out of this legislative mindset of this process-driven process. The president has a powerful bully pulpit that he can use to convince the country of the direction in which he's going. The problem is he hasn't articulated a very strong vision that has a majoritarian view. Yes, critics on the right will always criticize him, and he'll have some critics on the left. But if he can get a majoritarian view that is the large percentage of Democrats to support his view, his vision, and people in the middle, and maybe some on the right, then he will have a governing mandate. But as it is now, he keeps picking issues that are divisive. Abortion is a divisive issue. It cuts down the middle. I don't think it's going to have much effect one way or the other in midterm elections. Yes, some people, single issue voters on both sides, will be motivated to vote, but they'll both cancel each other out. It's not a winning issue for a presidential mandate.
I don't know if the majority of folks are straight down the middle on that. We know the majority of Americans actually do believe in abortion access, both men and women. But I do want to ask you, Dr. McHugh, specifically on how we're finding news now that women, for example, if they take certain medication, they may be denied it because it can cause a miscarriage. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's a great example of how legislative interference in the medical process has far-reaching impact that non-medical people could not anticipate. When we try to legislate medications around issues of pregnancy, then people who have the ability to become pregnant will be denied basic health care like the medications you're referring to. The pharmacies and the physicians and the people who are trying to provide health care are worried for their own safety and their own legal status as they are trying to navigate this new world that we live in post-Roe.
So, Rick, I want to ask you, because I thought one of the things that was so striking with the president is that he said, quote, and I heard we said this at the beginning of the hour, quote, what we're here witnessing wasn't a constitutional judgment. It was an exercise in raw political power. Here he is talking about a court that is supposed to be non-political and laying out that we now have an activist court. What is that tone, and how does that implicate the court in itself of being now impartial?
Well, I don't think that's true. And I'm surprised that the media is so surprised that the conservative court would actually have conservative rulings one after the other. And in fact, the right or conservatives could argue that it is Biden who is exerting raw political power by trying to override the court's decisions by executive order. He can certainly do that. And in fact, it is a tool that he can use, but it's a weak tool because any of the next presidents in line can easily withdraw those mandates. They're not codified into law. Remember, the Congress had nearly 50 years to codify Roe into law. They never did it. They could have done it in 2008 when Barack Obama had almost the majority in the Senate and 2 pro-choice Republicans. He didn't do it. And now they're scrambling to get it done. But this decision, remember, goes back to the states. I didn't say that to clarify that access to abortion may or may not have a majoritarian position. What I'm saying is that in the political sense, people, when they actually go out to vote, what motivates them to vote or cast their ballot, that is a small percentage. And those people do indeed cancel each other out. But if you look at the states, the majority of states actually have restriction to abortion, and only a minority, about 13, maybe 16 states have actually codified Roe into law in their own states. But most have not, and most have restrictions.
Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.